All right, so today we are going to be diving deep into the life of Martin Luther King Jr.
Okay.
And you've given us a ton of material.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that we're really going to go way beyond kind of like the I Have a Dream highlights.
Sure.
And it's fascinating to me how someone who is so iconic can still hold like these hidden depths.
Yeah.
Like we all know the name, and you probably already know that he was born into a world of activism in the
Right.
segregated South. But let's really try to uncover some of the less explored layers,
Yes.
of his journey to becoming this leader.
Yeah. And I think a good place to start with that is the idea that King's life wasn't just this inevitable march towards greatness.
Yeah.
His childhood, particularly one friendship, really stands out.
You're talking about the white childhood friend, right?
Exactly.
Where the parents stepped in and shut down the friendship solely because young Martin was black?
Exactly.
Yeah.
6 years old, experiencing that kind of raw personal rejection.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to overstate how that shapes a person's worldview.
Right.
Injustice wasn't some abstract concept for King. It was deeply personal from an early age.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but it also adds this whole other dimension to understanding, where his drive comes from.
Right.
And speaking of family dynamics, his father, Martin Luther King Sr.,
Right.
was a huge influence, a pastor deeply involved in activism. But get this, he initially opposed
Yeah.
MLK's commitment to nonviolence.
What's fascinating is that King Sr. believed in, self-defense,
Wow.
like an eye for an eye. And this wasn't just a generational difference.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the complexity of how the Black community grappled with oppression,
Yeah.
even within a family dedicated to the cause.
Right.
There were these really passionate disagreements about the
Yeah.
best way forward.
So even as like a young man, MLK is already forging his own path, not just inheriting, his father's views wholesale.
Right.
And that independent thinking really took him from Morehouse College to Crozer Theological Seminary,
Right.
then all the way to Boston University for his doctorate.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about degrees, though.
Right.
This is where figures like Dr. Benjamin Mays at Morehouse became crucial, right?
Yeah. Mays, a renowned scholar and activist himself,
Yeah.
really pushed King to think critically about social justice, about the intellectual underpinnings of a movement.
Right.
This wasn't some passive absorption of ideas, but active debate and mentorship that shaped how King viewed the world.
It totally dismantles this oversimplified notion that King just copied Gandhi.
Yeah.
He was exposed to those ideas, sure. But our sources really emphasize how he adapted and refined them,
Right.
making nonviolent resistance work, specifically within the American context of the mid-20th century.
King understood that for nonviolence to be effective, it had to resonate with the cultural and political landscape. He saw how deeply intertwined racism was with America's institutions, with its laws and its economic systems.
Right.
It wasn't just about changing individual hearts. It was about dismantling systemic injustice.
And that's where his faith becomes so much more than just this biographical detail,
Yeah.
King was a pastor, sure, but the sources you provided really dig into how he saw moral justice
Right.
as inseparable from his spiritual core.
Yes, sir.
This wasn't politics, it was a righteous crusade, deeply rooted in his beliefs.
And that resonated powerfully with Black communities who already drew strength and resilience from their faith.
Yeah.
King was speaking their language literally and figuratively,
Yeah.
but he was also doing something remarkable.
Oh,
He was able to articulate his message in a way that transcended race,
okay.
appealing to the conscience of white America by framing civil rights as a moral imperative.
And that leads us to the Montgomery bus boycott,
Yes.
which is, iconic kind of King's entrance onto the national stage.
Right.
But even in this well-known story,
Yeah.
our deep dive reveals some surprising insights. Everyone focuses on his powerful oratory.
Right.
But what about the behind the scenes work?
What's often overlooked is King's organizational genius. I mean, the boycott lasted over a year.
Right.
That takes meticulous planning, communication, and the ability to maintain morale through hardship.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about inspiring speeches. It was about coordinating logistics, fundraising, legal challenges, and keeping a diverse group of people united for a common cause.
And it culminated in a Supreme Court decision.
Yes.
Desegregating buses.
Huge.
This was a legal victory, a kind of woven into a protest movement,
Yes.
showcasing King's multifaceted approach right from the start.
Absolutely.
He wasn't just a charismatic speaker, he was a strategic mastermind.
Yes.
But this victory came at a personal cost, right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. The sources you shared paint a kind of a harrowing picture of what King endured during this period.
Yeah.
Yes, there were threats, but let's be specific. His home was bombed.
Yeah.
He was stabbed during a book signing.
Wow.
The FBI was relentless in their surveillance, trying to discredit him at every turn.
It's easy to gloss over those details.
Yeah.
But to really grasp, like, King's courage, we need to sit with that reality for a moment.
Absolutely.
Imagine living under constant threat,
Right?
never knowing when violence might erupt.
Chilling.
It's chilling.
And what's even more impactful is that King acknowledged the toll it took on him.
Yeah.
He mentioned, battling depression, struggling with fear for his family's safety.
Yeah.
This humanizes him, reminds us he wasn't some, superhuman figure
Right.
immune to the pressures and anxieties of such a dangerous fight.
It makes his perseverance all the more remarkable. Like, he kept pushing forward
Yes.
despite those immense personal burdens. And speaking of facing hardship, his letter from Birmingham jail takes on a whole new meaning when we consider the context.
This wasn't some scholarly treatise written from a place of comfort.
Right.
He was in jail amidst a protest, experiencing the brutality of segregation firsthand.
Yeah.
It's a visceral, immediate response to injustice.
Yeah.
And that famous line, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere,
Right.
takes on a whole new weight when you understand where it came from.
It elevated the movement.
Yeah.
It forced people to see that this wasn't just some, like, regional problem,
Right.
but a threat to the very fabric of American society.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, comes the March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech,
Right.
iconic moments. But even here,
Yeah.
our deep dive reveals some fascinating nuances.
The march itself wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a strategically organized push for specific legislation. The Civil Rights Act. King and his allies understood the importance of leveraging public pressure
Right.
to achieve tangible political change.
And the Dream speech,
Right.
while undeniably beautiful and moving,
Right.
was also a masterclass in rhetoric.
Yeah.
He didn't just speak of lofty ideals.
Right.
He strategically invoked shared American values,
Absolutely.
appealing to the nation's conscience,
Yeah.
and drawing this direct line from those ideals to the fight for equality.
Powerful.
It was brilliant.
The impact was undeniable. The Civil Rights Act passed the following year,
Wow.
a monumental victory for King and the movement.
Right.
But this was just one chapter in a much larger story.
Yeah.
A story that continues to unfold as King's understanding of the problem deepens.
Wait, so even with these massive wins,
Yes.
King doesn't rest.
He recognizes
What happens now?
that legal equality
Yeah.
doesn't automatically translate to economic equality.
Oh, right.
He sees how deeply intertwined racism is with poverty,
Right.
with lack of opportunity, with the very structures of American society.
Okay.
And that's where his focus begins to shift.
Yeah.
To a broader vision of justice. It's a shift that would both inspire and challenge those around him.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. So we've got King on the world stage,
Right,
a Nobel Peace Prize winner,
right.
but also pushing into new, potentially controversial territory.
Yes.
Tell me more about this shift and where it leads him.
So this shift in focus leads him to launch the Poor People's Campaign in 1968.
Okay.
And, it wasn't just about racial equality anymore.
Right.
It was about addressing the systemic poverty that disproportionately affected Black communities and poor people of all backgrounds.
So he's expanding his vision to encompass, like, economic justice? Didn't that create some tension? Like, wasn't that a risky move?
Absolutely. Some of his allies worried that he was diluting the focus on racial equality, spreading himself too thin. Others questioned his decision to openly criticize the Vietnam War,
Right.
which alienated even President Johnson.
So he was willing to risk alienating, like, powerful allies,
Yes.
even losing support, like, within the movement itself, to speak truth to power.
Exactly.
It shows the depth of his conviction.
Yes.
But let's go back to the Poor People's Campaign for a moment. What exactly did King envision with this campaign?
He imagined a multiracial coalition of poor people
Yeah.
marching on Washington, demanding economic justice from the government.
Wow.
He saw the connection between poverty and racism, and he believed that a movement for true equality had to address both.
Yeah.
It was a radical vision, one that challenged the very foundations of American society.
And it wasn't just about theoretical concepts. He was literally planning this massive demonstration,
Yes.
a physical manifestation of his vision. It's tragic that he was assassinated just weeks before the campaign was set to begin.
Yeah. His death was a devastating blow, not just to the civil rights movement, but to the broader struggle for social and economic justice.
Right.
But even in death, his legacy continued to inspire action. His funeral was attended by thousands, a testament to the impact he had on people's lives.
Yeah.
And the Poor People's Campaign went forward, though without its leader, it ultimately failed to achieve its goals.
It makes you wonder what could have been if he had lived to see it through.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a moment and think about King's legacy in a broader context.
Okay.
We've seen how he evolved from a local activist to a national leader to a global figure.
Right.
What do you think his impact has been on the world stage?
His message of nonviolent resistance has resonated far beyond America's borders.
Yeah.
Activists and movements around the world have drawn inspiration from his example, using his tactics and philosophy to fight for justice in their own contexts. From the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa to the struggle for democracy in Eastern Europe.
Wow.
King's influence can be seen in countless struggles for freedom and equality.
It's incredible to think how one man's life could have such a profound impact on the world. But let's bring it back to the present day.
Sure.
How do you think King would respond to the issues facing us today?
That's a good question.
What causes would he champion?
Yeah.
What strategies would he employ? It's almost like we're asking ourselves, what would King do?
That's a powerful question.
Yeah.
And one that I think many activists and leaders grapple with today.
Yeah.
It's clear from our deep dive that King wouldn't shy away from the tough issues.
Right.
He wouldn't be afraid to speak truth to power.
Yeah.
Even if it meant alienating allies or facing backlash.
Yeah, he was never one to just play it safe.
Right.
He was always pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
He saw injustice.
Right.
And he called it out, regardless of the consequences.
Exactly. And remember, he was assassinated while supporting striking sanitation workers.
Right.
This wasn't some abstract fight for him.
Yeah.
He was on the ground fighting for economic justice alongside those who needed it most.
Right.
He understood that true solidarity means standing with the marginalized, even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular.
So connecting that to today,
Yeah.
it's hard not to think about movements like Black Lives Matter, fighting for racial justice and police reform.
Yeah.
Do you think King would be on the front lines with them?
I think it's safe to say that King would be deeply concerned about the issues that Black Lives Matter is addressing.
Yeah.
The persistence of systemic racism, police brutality, mass incarceration.
Right.
These are all issues that directly connect to the work he dedicated his life to.
Right.
He would see the echoes of the past in the struggles of the present,
Yeah.
and he would demand justice.
And remember how he shifted his focus to economic justice later in his life?
Yeah.
He saw the deep connection between racial equality and economic equality.
Absolutely.
And I bet he'd be speaking out about wealth inequality, the lack of opportunity in many communities, just like he did with the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah.
He wouldn't just be focused on dismantling overt racism.
Right.
He'd be tackling the systemic inequalities that perpetuate injustice.
Absolutely. And his approach wouldn't just be about protests and marches,
Right.
although those would undoubtedly be part of it.
Yeah.
Remember, King was a master strategist.
Right.
He understood the importance of legislation, of working within the system to create lasting change.
Right.
So I imagine he'd also be advocating for policy changes,
Yeah.
for economic reforms that addressed the root causes of inequality.
Right.
He'd be working on multiple fronts,
Yeah.
using every tool at his disposal to create a more just and equitable society.
Okay, so we've got racial justice, economic justice.
Yeah.
What about his global perspective?
Right.
He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. He spoke out against the Vietnam War.
Right.
What global issues do you think would capture his attention today?
Right.
Would he still be advocating for peace and nonviolence?
I think so.
in a world that often seems consumed by conflict.
Well, given his commitment to nonviolence and peace,
Right.
I think he'd be deeply troubled by the ongoing conflicts around the world.
Yeah.
The wars, the refugee crises, the rise of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
These are all issues that would likely weigh heavily on him.
Yeah.
He would see the interconnectedness of these issues.
Right.
How violence in one part of the world ripples outward,
Right.
creating suffering and injustice everywhere.
And let's not forget the climate crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
This is a global issue
Yes.
with huge implications for justice and equality,
Right.
especially for communities that are already marginalized and disproportionately affected by climate change.
Exactly.
I can't imagine King staying silent on that.
No, I don't think so either.
He'd see the environmental crisis
Yeah.
as a moral issue,
Right.
a matter of life and death for millions of people around the world.
You're right. He'd likely see the climate crisis as a moral issue, just like he saw the Vietnam War.
Right.
And he'd probably call for a global response,
Yeah.
rooted in compassion,
Right.
and a commitment to protecting the most vulnerable.
Right.
He would challenge us to think beyond national borders.
Yeah.
And to recognize our shared humanity
Right.
in the face of this existential threat.
So it seems like King's vision was so much bigger
Yes.
than just specific issues.
Right.
He was fighting for a fundamental shift. Yeah.
In how we treat each other.
Right.
How we structure our society.
Absolutely.
He was calling for a revolution of values.
Yes.
A transformation of the human heart.
Exactly. Remember his concept of the beloved community.
Right.
This wasn't just a political goal.
Yeah.
It was a vision for a world transformed by love, justice, and understanding.
Right.
That's the kind of radical hope that I think he'd be calling for today. He would challenge us to imagine a world beyond the limitations of our current systems.
Right.
And to strive for something truly transformative.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
But let's get real for a second.
Sure.
King faced intense opposition, even hatred
Yes.
during his lifetime.
Right.
Do you think he'd be able to make headway in today's polarized climate? Would his message of love and unity
Tough question.
resonate in a world that often seems so divided? That's a tough question. There's no doubt that today's political landscape is incredibly divided.
Yeah.
But remember, King faced incredible opposition during his time as well.
Right.
He was threatened, harassed, even jailed for his beliefs.
Yeah.
He knew that the path to justice is rarely smooth.
Right.
And he never let fear silence his voice.
And yet he never gave up.
Right.
He kept pushing forward, even when it seemed like the odds were stacked against him. He believed in the power of life to overcome hate.
Yeah.
And he refused to let cynicism extinguish his hope.
Right. And that's where his unwavering faith,
Yeah.
his belief in the power of love and nonviolence really shines through.
Right.
He understood that creating change requires not just strategy and tactics,
Yeah.
but also a deep commitment to your values, even when it's hard,
Right.
even when it's dangerous.
Right.
He would remind us that the fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
And that we need to sustain ourselves with hope and compassion,
Right.
if we want to see it through.
So would he be using social media?
Oh, that's interesting.
Giving TED Talks?
Yeah.
Writing viral blog posts?
It's fun to imagine.
Would he be leveraging the tools of the 21st century
Yeah.
to spread his message
I think so.
and mobilize people for change?
It's fun to imagine how he'd use today's tools.
Yeah.
I think he'd be a master of communication.
Right.
Just like he was with his speeches and writings.
Right.
He'd find ways to connect with people, to inspire them to action.
Sure.
He would understand the power of storytelling,
Yeah.
of using social media to amplify the voices of the marginalized and to build a global movement for justice.
But I bet he wouldn't just be on Twitter all day.
Right. Of course not.
He'd be out in the streets,
Yeah.
organizing, building coalitions.
Absolutely.
Just like he did during the civil rights movement. He'd be connecting with people face to face, building relationships,
Right.
and fostering a sense of community.
Absolutely. He understood that real change happens not just through words,
Right.
but through action,
Right.
through organizing communities and building power from the ground up. he would be working to empower people at the grassroots level,
Yeah.
helping them to find their voice
Right.
and to fight for their own liberation.
Okay, so we've talked about the issues King might champion today,
Right.
but what about his approach?
Yeah.
Would his tactics need to evolve for the 21st century?
That's a good question.
Would nonviolent resistance
Right.
still be effective
Yeah.
in a world that's increasingly interconnected and digitized?
That's a fascinating question. Nonviolent resistance was central to King's philosophy.
Yeah.
And I think it would still be a core principle for him today.
Right.
But he was also a strategic thinker. And I imagine he'd adapt his tactics to fit the context of the modern world. Yeah. He wouldn't be stuck in the past.
Right.
He'd be constantly evolving.
Right.
Finding new and creative ways to challenge injustice and build a better future.
So maybe instead of just sit-ins,
Right.
we'd see like online boycotts,
Yeah.
digital campaigns targeting corporations that perpetuate injustice.
That's possible.
Would he be using the power of the internet to mobilize people,
Absolutely.
raise awareness,
Yeah.
and put pressure on those in power?
Exactly. And remember, King was a master of using the media to his advantage.
Right.
He understood the power of images and stories to sway public opinion.
Right.
So I bet he'd be leveraging social media,
Yeah.
creating viral moments
Yeah.
that expose injustice
Right.
and demand change. He would understand that the battle for hearts and minds is fought not just in the streets, but also in the digital realm.
And think about how he built coalitions,
Yeah.
bringing together different groups
Absolutely.
under a shared vision for justice.
Yeah.
I can see him doing the same today,
Right.
connecting movements for racial justice, economic justice, environmental justice,
Absolutely.
creating a powerful force for change.
Yeah.
He would understand that the fight for justice is intersectional.
Yes.
And that we need to build bridges across different movements
Right.
if we want to create a truly just and equitable world.
Right. He'd be highlighting the intersectionality of these issues,
Yeah.
showing how they're all connected
Right.
and how fighting for one strengthens the fight for all.
Right.
He'd be building bridges just like he did during his lifetime. He would remind us that our struggles are interconnected,
Right.
and that we are stronger when we stand together.
It's about building a big tent, right?
Exactly.
Welcoming people with different backgrounds,
Okay.
different experiences, different ideas,
Yeah.
as long as they share the same fundamental goal of creating a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing that we are all part of the solution.
Yes.
And that we need to work together
Yes.
if we want to create lasting change.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the shared humanity that connects us all, despite our differences. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of King's legacy that we haven't fully explored yet, his deep spirituality. It wasn't just a personal belief system for him. It was the bedrock of his activism.
You're right. We've touched on it, but haven't really delved into how faith fueled his work. It's easy to say he was a pastor.
Right.
But what does that really mean in the context of the movement?
King's faith wasn't just about sermons and scriptures. It was about tapping into the deep well of spiritual resilience within the Black community. For generations, Black churches had been more than just places of worship. They were centers of community, sources of strength in the face of oppression, and crucibles where the fight for freedom was forged.
So he's drawing on this rich history, this tradition of faith as a source of resistance.
Absolutely.
It adds a whole new layer to understanding his impact.
Absolutely. He was drawing on the power of Black liberation theology,
Yeah.
a school of thought that sees the struggle for social justice as inseparable from the pursuit of spiritual liberation.
Right.
It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every human being,
Yeah.
regardless of race or social status,
Right.
and connecting that belief to the fight for equality.
It's not just about changing laws then. It's
Right.
about changing hearts and minds, about
Right.
transforming society from the inside out.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And King was a master at communicating this message, weaving together biblical stories, the rhythms of gospel music, and the lived experiences of Black Americans to create a message that resonated on multiple levels.
Yeah.
He could speak to people's souls, not just their intellects.
It makes sense why he could mobilize people in such a profound way. He wasn't just arguing a point.
Right.
He was appealing to something deeper,
Yeah.
something that resonated with their own beliefs and experiences.
Right. And he didn't shy away from challenging white America
Right.
to live up to its own professed Christian values.
Yeah.
He constantly called out the hypocrisy of a nation that claimed to be founded on principles of equality while simultaneously denying those same rights to its black citizens.
He was holding up a mirror to society.
Yes.
Forcing people to confront the gap between their ideals and their actions.
Exactly. And he did it with a combination of righteous anger and an unwavering hope. He didn't just condemn injustice.
Right.
He offered a vision of redemption, of a society transformed by love and reconciliation. It's a message that continues to resonate today, even in the face of cynicism and division.
It's like he's offering a roadmap for how to create a better world.
Yeah.
Not just through political action, but through a fundamental shift in our values and priorities.
And it's important to acknowledge that King's faith wasn't without its critics or complexities.
Right.
Some people accused him of mixing religion and politics, while others within the movement felt that the church was too focused on the afterlife.
Right.
And not engaged enough with the struggles of the here and now.
So even his faith, which was such a driving force for him, sparked debate and disagreement.
Right. It highlights that even within a movement, there will always be different perspectives, different approaches.
Right.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line. And that true social change requires ongoing dialogue, critical thinking, and a willingness to grapple with uncomfortable truths.
Okay, so we've explored King's spirituality, his strategic brilliance, his unwavering commitment to justice.
Right.
But as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I keep coming back to this question.
Yeah.
What can we learn from him today?
Right.
What lessons from his life and legacy can we apply to the challenges we face in the 21st century?
I think one of the most important lessons is the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change.
Right.
King wasn't a superhero. He was a human being who experienced doubt, fear, and frustration.
Right.
Which, just like all of us.
Yeah.
But he had a vision.
Yeah.
And he was willing to put everything on the line to make that vision a reality.
And he inspired countless others to join him on that journey, to recognize their own power to make a difference. The civil rights movement was a testament to the collective power of people who came together to demand a better world.
Precisely. And that's a message that's just as relevant today as it was in King's time. We don't have to wait for a charismatic leader to come along and save us.
Right.
We can all be agents of change, starting in our own communities, using our voices and actions to challenge injustice and create a more just and equitable world.
It's about recognizing that we are all part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
That our individual actions can contribute to a larger movement for change.
Exactly. King's legacy is a call to action, a reminder that the work of building the beloved community is never finished. It's an ongoing process that requires each of us to step up, to speak out, to organize, to act, and to never give up hope in the face of adversity.
Powerful words to end on. And for everyone listening out there, we hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for the depth and complexity of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy. He was more than just a dreamer. He was a strategist, a leader, a man of deep faith who challenged us to live up to our highest ideals. May his example continue to inspire us to create a world where justice and equality prevail.